Good morning, boys and girls. My name is Mr. Zach. I'm your host today, and today this is going to be your teacher, Miss Katie. Today we're going to be learning more about the Earth inside and out.
Hello. By the end of today's lesson, you will be able to orally compare and contrast geysers and volcanoes. You'll also be able to retell important facts and information from a read aloud that we'll do today. All right, let's get started. So before we get started, let's review some vocabulary. It's important to always build our background knowledge. So before we get started, we're going to look at this vocabulary to help us understand how volcanoes and geysers are quite different. Our first word is destructive, meaning causing damage or ruin. And here I have an image of a house that has been destructed. And as you can see, their windows and different parts of it are not how they were when they first built the house. So destructive means causing damage. There's a lot of damage on this house. Number two is eruption, the act of exploding suddenly. And when we hear the word eruption, we often think of a volcano, which we'll talk about today. Number three is geyser, a place on the earth where hot water and steam shoot up from inside the earth to the surface. And here's a picture of a geyser to give you an image. Number four is lava, molten or liquid rock on the earth's surface. And it looks sort of like this, kind of an orange-red substance that's more of a liquid. And then last but not least is magma, molten or liquid rock that is deep inside the mantle of the earth. Okay, so now we're going to look at three important words that we've talked about through all of these lessons. Our first word is heat, our second word is pressure, and our third word is time. Heat, pressure, and time are the three things that help or cause change to the earth. All right, so now let's get started with our read aloud. Let's review what we previously learned. If we look inside the earth, it has four parts. Can you name them? Remember, we have the crust, the mantle, the outer core, and the inner core. Remember, we learned that heat causes hot rock to move around in the mantle and sometimes rise up through the surface of the crust. This causes a volcano to form. Here we see an image of a volcano. Can you describe what you see here? You may have said that it is hot or that fire is bursting from the top. Those are two very good descriptions. Great work. In our last lesson, we learned three important words that Jerry, the geologist, told us to remember. We just actually reviewed those before we got started. Do you remember these words? If you said heat, pressure, and time, you are exactly right. Heat, pressure, and time causes changes to the earth and may result in volcanoes. Today we are going to learn more about volcanoes and some famous hotspots. So listen closely. Hawaii. I just love this place. The land is beautiful, the people are friendly, the weather is perfect, and the surfing is terrific. Personally, however, my favorite part of Hawaii is the volcanoes. If you like volcanoes, and all geologists do, then there is really no better place than Hawaii. When most people think of volcanoes, they think of the top blowing off a mountain and lava flowing out everywhere. Volcanic activity actually comes in many different forms. Did you know that not all mountains or volcanoes are as spectacular as a mountaintop eruption? Remember, we learned in our vocabulary that lava is molten or liquid rock that has come to the Earth's surface. So, before we move on, do all volcanoes erupt in a mountaintop eruption? If you said no, you are exactly right. Here in this image, you can see Hawaii circled. Hawaii is made up of 8 major islands, 7 of which are inhabited. Remember, inhabited means people live there. The islands of Hawaii were formed by volcanic activity. In other words, if it weren't for volcanoes, Hawaii would not be there at all. Hawaii is one of the best known volcanic hotspots in the whole world. A hotspot is a place where there has been continuous volcanic activity for a long time. In Hawaii's case, the volcanic activity started underwater. In fact, most volcanic activity occurs underwater, deep down near the ocean floor. Down there, the crust is fairly thin, so it's easier for magma to seep up from the mantle. When a volcano erupts underwater, the lava that it releases cools very quickly. Over time, that's one of our 3 words, millions of years, this lava piles up. That is what happened in Hawaii. Over time, the lava continually erupting from the hotspot built up a pile that now reaches from the deep ocean floor all the way to the ocean surface, where it became new dry land. Did you hear the word time? It takes a very long time for lava to pile up into mountains. How do you think Hawaii was formed? If you said over time Hawaii was formed by many, many eruptions, you are exactly right. Now remember previously we talked about how not all volcanoes erupt the same way. Hawaiian volcanoes erupt gradually or little by little. The lava bubbles and gurgles and sputters rather than shooting up out of the earth all at once. There is still plenty of volcanic activity on some Hawaiian islands, which means the island chain is still growing. In this image, you can see how the volcano has lava sputtering from the top rather than blowing out the top all at once. Now, let's compare the Hawaiian volcano to another type of volcano, the kind where the mountaintop does explode. This volcano erupted in the state of Washington, which is on the west coast of the United States. You can see it here, pointed out with a yellow arrow. Let's take a look at what that volcano actually looked like. This is what Mount St Helens looked like until the year 1980. Mount St Helens proves that it is generally fairly easy to predict where a volcano will erupt. The hard part is figuring out when it will erupt. Mount St Helens has erupted many times over the course of 40,000 or so years, and during this time the mountain's size and shape has changed. Magma is constantly building up within Mount St Helens. Unlike the magma in Hawaiian volcanoes, however, the magma in this area is much stickier than the magma in Hawaii, so it does not gurgle and sputter through little vents. Instead, the magma gets stuck and incredible pressure builds up within the mountain. Eventually, the pressure becomes so intense that the mountain cannot hold it anymore, and boom! The eruption of Mount St. Helens was the most destructive volcanic eruption in U.S. history. Hundreds of homes were destroyed and thousands of acres of forests were leveled when this mighty volcano erupted. In an instant, the top and one of the sides of the mountain were literally blown away. Lava was not the main problem with Mount St. Helens. Rather, it was the immense amount of rock and ash that exploded into the air, as well as the landslides that followed as the mountain came crashing down into the valley below. Did you hear the word pressure? Yes, pressure is what caused this particular volcano to erupt, as you see in the picture. This is what Mount St. Helens looks like today. It is still tall enough to rise above the clouds, but if you compare this to the first picture you saw, you can see that it is not the same mountain it used to be. Mount St. Helens has erupted several more times after that day in 1980, and it still erupts occasionally to this day. Here is another place in the United States where there is lots of volcanic activity. This place is called Yellowstone National Park. Yellowstone is mostly in Wyoming, with parts of it extending into Idaho and Montana. And here on the map, you can kind of see where that is located. Yellowstone National Park is home to many interesting and beautiful sights, like this picture. Like Hawaii, Yellowstone is situated on top of a hot spot, a place where there is lots of magma close to the surface. In Yellowstone, the magma has stayed underground and has not erupted onto the surface. Yellowstone is famous for its geysers. A geyser is a rare geologic event that occurs when water seeps down through cracks into the crust and meets up with hot rocks. When the water touches the hot rocks, it turns into steam. Heat causes the liquid water to become a gas called steam, like the steam that comes out of a hot bowl of soup. As more water seeps in, more steam is created and pressure begins to build. Eventually, all this heat and pressure forces the steam to find a way back out. As in other types of volcanic activity that you have learned about, this process is caused by the buildup and release of pressure underground. The result is a geyser, steam and water spewing up out of the earth. These particular geysers are relatively small. They spurt and bubble all day long in water pools or springs, which have a pretty bluish-green color created by certain minerals that collect there. So as you can see, this looks sort of like a volcano. However, we have learned that it is quite different. A geyser is very different from a volcano. Did you hear the words heat and pressure? Heat and pressure cause geysers to erupt. Lava spews out of a volcano. So what spews out of a geyser? If you said hot steam and water, you are correct. This geyser has a name. It's called Old Faithful. The word faithful means trustworthy or reliable. Why do you think the geyser might be called Old Faithful? What does it mean to be reliable? Old Faithful got its name because you can count on the fact that it is going to erupt several times a day. It is not possible to predict exactly when it will erupt, but it typically blows its lid about every 90 minutes, give or take a few. Old Faithful spews out steam and hot water for anywhere from 1 to 5 minutes. It can spew as much as 8,000 gallons of water, up to 185 feet in the air. Every day during the summer, when the park is full of visitors, hundreds of people gather around to watch the world's most famous geyser. Although they come in many forms, shapes, and sizes, all volcanoes and geysers have two things in common. They are the Earth's way of releasing heat and pressure from deep underground, and each one tells us a little more about the history of the Earth. And one other thing, all volcanoes and geysers are extremely hot, so always keep a safe distance and admire them from afar. That completes our read aloud. So now we're going to review a few questions. So I'm going to have Mr. Zach come join us again.
Hey everybody.
Here he is. So, Mr. Zach, we're going to have to review a few questions because this can get really tricky. So, let's talk about first, what is a hot spot?
A hot spot, well, hot means it's hot, right? And a spot means a place where it's hot. So, a hot spot must be and I'm making a lot of inferences here, but the hot spot must be a place on the Earth where there's a lot of volcanic activity?
Yes, you're exactly right.
Awesome.
A hotspot is a place on the Earth where there's lots of volcanic activity. So we talked about in the read aloud Hawaii. That's one place that is considered a hotspot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, our next question. Speaking of Hawaii, how did the volcanoes form in Hawaii? How did they form the islands of Hawaii?
Oh, okay. So the islands were formed by volcanoes.
Right.
So
Can
when
you explain
volcanoes
it?
erupt, when they erupt, they send out this molten rock.
Mm-hmm.
And when they do that in the ocean, like they're doing underneath the Hawaiian Islands,
Mm-hmm.
that rock comes to the surface and it hardens because it cools down.
That's exactly right. And we learned that over time, the magma that comes out, the lava, once it leaves the magma chamber and it comes out of the volcano, it builds layers and layers and layers. And some people don't believe it, but there can be underwater volcanoes. And Hawaii actually started underwater, and it built up over time until it rose above the water surface to create dry land. Okay? Which layer of the Earth, going back to the layers of the Earth, which layer of the Earth does magma come from?
I'm smiling because I remember this one. And if we think back, remember the Earth only has a few layers. So we have the crust, which is the outside. And I don't think it's that one because I don't see a lot of magma around, you know. And so with underneath the crust, we have the mantle. And I believe the mantle is where a lot of that molten rock is formed. And then from pressure and heat from the Earth, it'll force it out through one of those volcanoes.
That's exactly right, yes. Most of the magma is formed inside the mantle of the Earth. Okay? Now, once magma leaves that magma chamber, Mr. Zach, and it gets, pressure just keeps building and building and building, and it comes up and it goes all over the Earth's surface, what is it called then?
Lava.
Yes.
I knew that one.
That is a favorite question
I
for a
always
lot
get
of
those
people.
two mixed up, but now I don't. Thank you.
Yep. A lot of children love to talk about lava and how it flows all over the Earth, even though it can be quite dangerous. Okay. Last but not least, what is a geyser? We know what a volcano is, but what's a geyser?
Well, I remember from your definition here, it's where hot water and steam shoot up. And I'm looking at the pictures, and I mean, it looks a lot like a volcano, except there's not molten rock or lava coming out, but there's actually steamy water. But I'm just going to make a guess, and from listening to you, it's all the same processes, right? Because if there weren't for all this heat and all this pressure underneath here, nothing would be coming out of these. So where the heat and pressure is right here over under the geyser, it's pushing this water out. And sometimes I've seen a few geysers, it goes way up in the air, and you can sit there and watch it. But if it's in part of the mantle where there's a lot of molten rock or magma, then it's going to push the lava out. So
That's exactly right. Thank you, Mr. Zach.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Okay, now that we have reviewed some of what we learned, one of the goals for this lesson is that you can tell someone about the difference between a geyser and a volcano. Within the read aloud today, we talked about how people go to watch Old Faithful, which is a geyser. So how can someone sit and watch a geyser erupt, but not a volcano? Think about that. Yes, if you said it would hurt them or kill them or harm them, a volcano will do that, but a geyser will not. So that's why some people can watch one and not the other. So let's take a look at this chart. Geysers and volcanoes are very, very different. You can tell in the picture, like Mr. Zach said earlier, these two look very much alike, and the process in which they erupt is kind of the same. However, they can be quite different. Here we see that geysers erupt with steam and hot water, while volcanoes erupt with lava. That is very, very different. Geysers may be destructive. That's why you can watch some of them. You can get up to a certain distance and watch them. However, volcanoes can be very destructive. So there's a big difference there. A famous geyser that we talked about in the read aloud is Old Faithful, while a famous volcano we talked about is Mount St. Helens. Now, while they are very different, they also can be similar. So here at the bottom, we have two ways they are similar. Geysers and volcanoes both are Earth's way of releasing heat and pressure. Again, you hear heat, pressure, time. It takes time, and after time goes by, these two, geysers and volcanoes, are a way that the Earth releases the heat and pressure. Last but not least, one of the most important things that geologists like to know from geysers and volcanoes is that they tell us a little bit more about the history of the Earth. And when we look and learn about the history of the Earth, we can learn lots of different things. It helps people stay safe. It helps them learn where they can build houses at, because you wouldn't want to build a house close to where a volcano might be. You also can learn different places in the world that you can visit to see different places. Like Hawaii, you can visit there. It is a hot spot, has lots of volcanic activity, but there are different things in place to keep you safe. Last but not least, Yellowstone National Park is a great place to go to view some geysers. So in today's lesson, we learned that geysers and volcanoes are very different, but they both tell us more about the history of the Earth. And we also learned that through heat, pressure, and time, that we are able to see how different changes affect the Earth. And Mr. Zach, can you come and join us one more time?
I would be happy to.
So Mr. Zach, I want to know, which one of these would be your favorite? A geyser or a volcano, and why?
I don't know. I don't think I could choose a favorite because they're both really, really cool. But I would say that I think that volcanoes are probably would be a little bit more of a favorite, just because with all of that magma and hot lava, like you said, they can make new islands or they can create new land. While the geysers, they're really fun to watch, and the water comes up and it goes down, but not necessarily able to create a lot of new things like new land and new islands with them. So I guess I would have to go with volcanoes if I had to choose.
So his favorite is a volcano, while my favorite would be a geyser, because I know that I can safely go and visit and watch a geyser erupt. Geysers also erupt multiple times a day, so I won't have to wait as long. All right, great job today, guys, and great job answering those questions earlier. We are so glad you joined us today. All rights and credits from this lesson belong to Core Knowledge Language Arts. We would like to thank them for publicly sharing these materials.
Okay, we want you to, just like always, go out, share something you've learned today with a grown-up, a brother, a sister, a grandmother, a parent, a teacher. Tell them all the awesome things that you've learned so far about our home planet Earth. And as always, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.